Finance Committee hearing for Monday, September 14th, 2020. I'm Paul Gregorian, Chair of the committee. I see that I'm joined so far at least by Mr. Koretz and Mr. Bonin, and we're ready to begin today's meeting. Let's begin by calling the roll and establishing a quorum, please.
Thank you. Gregorian.
Here.
Price. Koretz.
Here.
Blumenfield. Bonin.
Bonin here.
3 members present and a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you very much. So we're going to begin by taking up item 9 out of order. I'd like to ask item 9's presentation to be made, and then we'll go ahead and open up the line for public comment. And I'd like to ask the clerk to please read the information regarding providing public comment, please.
Yes, members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on today's agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-655-3266 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press star 9 to request to speak. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll proceed when we take public comment to take 2 minutes total on agenda items that are on today's agenda, and then up to 1 minute for general public comment for items or for issues not on today's agenda. Very good. Let's go ahead and begin. And I see that Mr. Blumenfield is now here as well, so he should be added to our attendee list for quorum purposes. And let's go ahead and begin with our presentation of item number 9, please.
Item number 9 is a City Administrative Officer reports relative to the COVID-19 Emergency Response Account, a General City Purposes Fund status report for the weeks ending August 21st, 2020 and August 28th, 2020.
All right, who will be presenting on item 9?
This is Ed Rose with the CIO's office. The reports before you are a compilation of the weekly status reports for weeks ending August 21st and August 28th. On the 21st side, there's just one approved request from the Department of General Services for hand washing stations and portable toilets, totaling $966,000. And for the week ending August 28th, there were several departmental requests totaling $4.9 million. And various departments and various purposes. And these are part of our weekly status reports that we forward to your committee and to the council as a regular occurrence, giving you the financial status of the COVID-19 GCP fund.
I'm sorry, I was having a whole conversation and didn't realize that I was muted. Were there any questions on item number 9, members? Okay, we're going to go ahead and hold that one on the desk for now until we complete public comment. So we can begin now with the first public speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 4208. Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Caller, please silence your device because there's a delay. And for all callers, please silence your device so that we can hear what you have to say. Go right ahead, speaker.
Hello, is this me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to speak on items 9, 10, and general public comment.
All right, go right ahead. You'll have 2 minutes on the agenda items and 1 minute for general public comment, please.
So I think it's always worth looking at these COVID response accounts. And, back in July, you gave $1.2 million to LAPD so they could provide security at shelters. We need to remove LAPD from providing security at shelters. And just looking at that number, that's like a third of the Ethics Commission's entire budget for a year. Moving on to item 10, we have our mid-quarter status of the city's finances. And because of the failed reopening, we're facing an even bigger shortfall of revenues, $200 to $400 million. Optimistic scenario assumes that we resume normal activity by early 2021. Do any of you think that's going to happen? Looking at the hundreds of millions of dollars that we have to cover and COVID costs that's not covered by the state, county, or feds, we've got an even bigger hole. Last week, all but 3 of our council members refused to ask LAPD to come back to the negotiating table. There's only one person on this committee that was part of that vote. Looking at LAPD's raises, if we pulled those back, that would cover the cost of all the furloughs that we have. I really don't know why you kind of tiptoe around actually getting LAPD back to the table. I actually do, but it's just kind of baffling given, how does the math work without doing that? Y'all have basically admitted as much, and it's just kind of baffling to see no real instinct to actually do something. And you might say that you have little leverage when it comes to reopening contracts. Well, you have all of the leverage in the world when it comes to their drop retirement program, but you haven't wanted to touch that. That's something that you could easily do and begin that process. Probably won't happen. But moving on to my general public comment, I said this the other week, but it's just kind of baffling that we're allowing the Ethics Commission to effectively get axed in the middle of an FBI corruption scandal. This committee has always been much better than, the mayor when it comes to addressing the concerns with the Ethics Commission. And all of that progress that was made in recovering from the last recession has evaporated, essentially. I think that's something that's worth at least a conversation. And, I would note that last week when y'all talked about HHH and spending there and Project Roomkey, Mike Bonin was the only one that actually wanted to hear from LASA and the CAO. What are you doing? If you don't expect to ask them questions about issues like that, then what are you doing? It's just kind of baffling that all but one of our council members was willing to just kind of let that fly under the radar. Maybe you think you can have those conversations behind closed doors, but public accountability actually does involve that democratic process.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Next speaker, please. Please call the next speaker.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 6068, please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 6068, please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Yes. Hi, this is Richie Sergenko from People City Council in Sunrise Boom in LA. I'd like to speak on item 9 and 10, please.
Go right ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so item 9, the COVID response account. In July, this account gave $1.2 million to LAPD so they can provide quote-unquote security at shelters. We need to remove LAPD from any efforts to provide shelter for the unhoused. We know that LAPD is a violent and brutal force, and it's about time that we change how we treat unhoused folks in the city, and removing their interactions or limiting their interactions with LAPD is a good first step. Moving on to item 10, the mid-quarter status of the city's finances. Because of Garcetti's failed reopening, the city now estimates we will face a shortfall of budget revenues in the range of 200 to 400 million. This is optimistic considering, we would resume normal economic activity by early 2021, but that definitely isn't going to happen. I think, one thing you can do is start to touch that $3 billion, or start to touch more of that $3 billion that LAPD gets. One of you should stand up to the LAPPL and the violent Jamie McBride, who shot 5 people himself, and his daughter is a murderer. Tony McBride shot and killed Daniel Hernandez. And that's who you sit at the table with to discuss these LAPD contracts. And, should open them up. And, if you are listening to the people and you sit on council and sit on these committees to represent the voice of the people are saying defund the police. They aren't sitting at the table to say, or they aren't saying sit at the table with these brutal, violent people like Jamie McBride. And so like Rob Kwan said, the one thing you could do is open up the drop program, or cut or slash the drop program. That's not in any of the current negotiations or prior negotiations with the LAPPL. But yeah, and so moving on to general public comment, I just think that the city is thinking about declaring a fiscal emergency. We see hundreds of $millions in a budget shortfall, and LAPD is getting $3 billion. And people have been calling for months and months and months to say, hey, can you please cut the LAPD budget? $3 billion is too much. So if the city's about to face a fiscal emergency and there's revenue shortfalls, why not start with the biggest department? If you actually just cut the LAPD raises, that would cover all the furloughs that you're set to do. I'm just a normal person, and if I can do this math and I can see what is happening, surely you can too. It's just a matter of will and whether you're ready to stand up to the LAPPL. I doubt many of you are, and that's why we are in the situation we're currently in, because LAPPL has too much power and basically controls what you all do in regards to the police budget. So some of you should grow a backbone and do something about it instead of allowing thousands of people in the city to die because of your incompetence and your negligence. So good luck. Hope you figure it out, and hope you don't fuck the rest of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And members, I apologize. Apparently there's a little bit of a lag on Zoom, so there's a bit of a delay in our calling the speakers, but let's go ahead and proceed, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 1047, please state your name and the items you would like to speak on.
My name is Sylvester, and I would like to speak on items 9 and general public comment.
All right, you'll have 1 minute on each. Go right ahead, please.
So on 9, about, spending more money to, for the LAPD to watch homeless people. That's what that one is, right? For security. That's not what people need. What people need is resources instead of protecting the lack of resources that these people have. The gross kind of mismanagement that I'm saying from the budget, it doesn't really make sense. We're in a shortfall. LAPD takes up most of the budget, $3 billion, over 50% of the budget. The fire department's taking up 16% of the budget, and we can't cut that right now. And we're dealing with this huge crisis of homelessness, and instead of dealing with poverty head on, we're saying we're going to go ahead and pay people to go security detail where they're at. Security detail the lack of resources that they have, instead of investing in creating more resources for them or giving them more resources so they have at least something. It's really backwards. Now, I'm going to move on to my general public comment, and it goes on to talk about the budget. And we're spending over $3 billion reacting to crime. Because largely, a majority of what police work is reactionary, instead of investing in preventative measures. You know, when we look at the criminal responses in communities of color, they're environmental, poverty, ignorance, social isolation, economic deprivation. All of this breeds crime. And it's a crazy logic to keep on investing in people whose job it is to police this crime instead of investing in preventing this crime. You're putting officer lives at stake because you're sending them into under-resourced communities, and people are desperate, and when people lack resources, that's where you see crime happen. You're risking the lives of the officers.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank you very much. You too, sir. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 3459. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Caller, please select *6 to unmute yourself if you cannot be heard.
Go right ahead, speaker.
Hi, my name is Kendall James, and I'd like to speak on items 9 and 10.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, we need to remove LAPD from any public shelters and use those funds for essential services, not for criminalizing people who don't have housing. And with regards to item number 10, if we're facing a shortfall of $200 to $4 million, and that's really optimistic there, take it from the police overtime, inflated police budget, their raises. They are not essential services. We need people on the ground to help people that are unhoused, to get PPE, to get food and water and soap, and everything for the unhoused population right now is dire. We shouldn't criminalize them just for trying to exist.
Okay, thank you very much, speaker. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 9132. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Caller, please select.
This is Neil Brower. I'm just listening in. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 2616. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Press *6 to unmute yourself. Caller with the last 4 digits, 2616. Please state your name and what items you would like to speak on.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn. I'd like to speak on all the items and the general public comment.
Go right ahead, Mr. Previn. 2 minutes on the agenda, 1 minute on general.
Okay, thank you. Well, you know, it's the usual litigations, a falling tree limb litigation, a traffic collision litigation. And I just want to draw some attention to Whitsett and more lawsuit for people who were formerly subject to gang injunctions. So this is just unbelievable. This is the lawsuit that keeps on attacking financially because it was such a brutal violation of rights. I look forward to getting beyond it and to a brighter day. Obviously, the richer districts, we have a challenge to the city's denial for 26-unit condominium. And then congratulations to CD15 and CD3, Bloomingfield and Buscaino, who are managing to move around funding for theaters in their mostly white districts, frankly, where you've got just it's an astonishing maneuver. And last on the agenda is the Latino Heritage Month, which is just a polite $12,000 request, but let's do it PRA orally so that Kevin McNeely and the controller can provide all of the heritage celebration expenditures, because this has been the closet in which we've stored lots of little packages of money that get pushed out the door in a cloud of warmth as opposed to with transparency. So I'd like to see that. And I want to say thanks to the Office of Finance, goodbye to Claire Bartels. I know she exited right after Englander pled guilty in July. That's a red flag at the Office of Finance, where we hand out all the tax breaks to Richard Weintraub and others. So this is not something we take lightly, that she just walked out the door. And I know you remember, sir, when they were jacking up the ambulance fees at one of the budget hearings, when we used to have budget hearings, Englander acting like race fiends in Schindler's List on the balcony, like a madman saying, I'll pick it up for $1 million. Hello? Yeah, is that my general public comment? All right. Well, in general public comment, I would like to say I'm very disappointed about the retaliation lawsuit, and I was hoping that it wouldn't come to this, but it seems that in Studio City Neighborhood Council, they've deployed the local helpers to retaliate, believe it or not, against the great Government Affairs Committee, which is now being taken over by a small group, and you'll be touting that group on Wednesday, but it's a big mistake, because the community group, like the neighborhood councils, are intended to serve the community, not to serve the whim of a madman. And Randall Freed is, the mayor's BFF, but he's not doing a good job for the people in Studio City, because he wants to roll around on the floor and be a helper.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 1248, please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Please press star 6 if you need to unmute. Once again, caller with the last 4 digits, 1248. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Hi, this is Mimi. I'd like to speak on items 9, 10, and give general comment, please.
Go right ahead. You'll have 2 minutes on the agenda items and a minute for general public comment.
Thank you. Okay, so for item 9, $1.2 million for the LAPD to provide security at our shelters. There's so many things wrong with this, and that is such a precious amount of money right now, especially, that we could be using elsewhere. The cops are there at our shelters not to keep people safe, but to treat them like criminals. Like, that's how you see people who are houseless as criminals. I was just talking to one of my houseless neighbors the other day, and he said he can't stand to be there, even though it's clean, because it feels like jail. How can you expect people to want to go to shelters if you treat them like a criminal just for not being able to afford living in a home? So we need to remove LAPD completely and take that money and use it better. Let's use it to rehouse people. Moving on to item 10. I'd like to uplift first. Rob earlier said that if you cut all of the LAPD raises, then we'd have enough to cover all the furloughs. I can't imagine what it feels like to be a employee of the city who just lost their job because the LAPD didn't want to take a cut. That's unacceptable. all of our city's problems could be solved if we just took money from that budget. I mean, the LAPD gets money from not just this budget, but others. So even if it's just the $3 billion we're looking at, they're getting money all over. I don't understand why we don't just dip into that budget. It's huge. I don't understand how you can just be okay with other people having to lose their jobs because you're afraid to cut the LAPD budget at all. I mean, the cuts that happened earlier this year weren't really cuts because it was just already a raise from last year. You were just removing that raise. I'm just going to move on to general. Also, why do the LAPPL get to be in on budget meetings? That feels pretty biased to me. And what's it going to take for you guys to care that the police lie and murder and destroy communities? I truly hope it doesn't take a personal tragedy for you to care. People are dying in our streets, and you're paying for it to happen. I know a lot of you aren't paying attention, and a lot of you don't care. And that's unacceptable. Defund the police.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 6655. Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Are there issues on the Zoom side?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Shannon, and I would like to speak on item number 10 and a general public comment.
All right. You'll have 1 minute on the agenda item and a minute on general public comment. Go right ahead.
That the Zoom meeting is a half an hour.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that, with the city facing such a dire budget crisis right now, and we know that more austerity measures are needed, I think that the city council needs to take a hard look at the police budget. I would like to thank Councilmember Mike Bonin, I live in your district, for trying to at least get back to the negotiating table with the police union last week. I would hope that the entire council would follow his lead and take, more of a hard look at what we can do to cut the budget and use those funds to fund other services that are more urgently needed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 5318. Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Go right ahead, speaker.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 5318. Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Gina Viola. I'd like to speak on items 1 through 6, 10, and general public comment, please.
All right, you'll have 2 minutes on the agenda items and 1 minute for general public comment. Go right ahead.
Thanks. How can a council as embroiled in corruption scandals as this one is have any part of its meetings in closed sessions? Closed sessions need to stop. It erodes our very democracy. That's what you have city attorneys for and all the other various outside law firms, even on this agenda, that somehow are getting city monies. So utilize those spaces and bring things out into the open. No more closed session. Item number 10, the city's budget. Why must each and every department have to shoulder the budget shortfalls when it can easily be solved by divesting and downsizing the LAPD? I know many of you do not live in neighborhoods that are over-policed, and you probably never step foot in neighborhoods that are over-policed. And if you did, what you would see is an outrageous, flagrant display of LAPD's funding. When the police get called on one houseless person, within moments there are 10 to 12 cop cars that show up. If you drive around in the evening, anywhere in this city, you will see 6, 7, 8 cop cars on different corners hanging out. There is so much funding there that needs to be redistributed. If the mayor is talking about a $200 million shortfall, there's absolutely no reason that can't come from the LAPD. For my general comment, I want to talk about why these meetings are still audio only. The only way to give any kind of meaningful comment is to have multiple devices to do it with. That is such a problem, and it is so limiting to so many people. This process is excruciating. You are using Zoom. You need to do Zoom webinars that are much easier for folks to be able to either call into or use one device. In addition, for those who call in and want to listen and give comment using the phone, they get hung up on the minute their comment is done. Additionally, we don't see you. It's not meaningful to us to not know what is happening in these meetings when all we can do is hear them. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 1108. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1108. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Yeah, hi, it's Daniel Gus, and there was no way to know that the meeting had begun.
That's the guy.
You will have an email complaint from
Go
me.
right ahead,
I wish to
Mr.
speak.
Gus. Which items would you like to speak on?
Okay, item 10, 10, 15, and 16, and general, please.
Okay, 2 minutes on the agenda and 1 minute on general, please.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. On item number 10, I've expressed this opinion recently. I am concerned that there are family members of city officials who are going to be termed out or who might lose elections who will be offered the SIP program. For example, Mr. Wesson, a good number of his family members are employed by the city. He's termed out. He's either going to be leaving the city's employment by winning the county supervisor race, or he'll lose and he'll be termed out. I think it's very important that family members of politicians not be offered this program, since it's very clear they're going to be leaving the city's employment. That's just one example of that. So that's my opinion on number 10. It's a good idea for a program, but I'm concerned it'll be abused. And I should note that Mr. Wesson did not recuse himself from voting on a SIP issue last week. Mr. Koretz did recuse himself. Mr. Wesson didn't. If Mr. Koretz did, Mr. Wesson should have also, and that's where the concern comes from. Item number 15, I am concerned that there is only a 13-word description item for item number 15. So let's be clear. A city employee had to hire an attorney to be interviewed by the federal government for the corruption scandal going on. There's nothing shameful in item number 13. The only thing that's shameful is the description, which is very vague. And in this day and age where we're dealing with actual city officials going to or seemingly going to federal prison for years, if not decades, I think the description should have been more transparent, because it's the shortest one in here. And look how short it is compared to the other descriptions. I have no problem spending this money. I have a problem with the less than transparent purpose for item number 15. Item number 16, this is a good item, but it is long overdue. In 2014, Mr. Wesson asked me to write a report over, for lack of a better word, misappropriation or less than completely transparent use of funds at animal services and other hijinks going on there. This is a very good idea. You know, similarly, the Animal Welfare Trust Fund, where people donate money to help the city's deadly pounds do their business, those funds have been misused for travel. They've been misused for tickets to events, for lodging, not bringing comfort to animals. This is a very good idea. So, by the way, Mr. Koretz's name is misspelled on the motion. But Mr. Koretz and Mr. Blumenfield, this is a very good thing, because everything is spay and neuter. If we only poured every dollar we have into spay and neuter, we might not need as many deadly pounds as we have. Do I go on to general, or is that it?
I'm afraid that was the full 3 minutes, Mr. Gus. But thank you very much for your comment. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You as well.
Next speaker, please.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 4045. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 4045. Please state your name and the items that you'd like to speak on. Last time. Caller with the last 4 digits, 4045. Please state your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Caller, go right ahead. Speaker?
Hello? Can
Hi.
I make general public comment?
You may. You have 1 minute for general public comment.
I still haven't had a good reason why you haven't defunded the police. There's plenty of information that everybody has given you. I don't need to reiterate what people have been asking for. That's the end of my public comment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers on the queue?
No, Mr. Chair, we do not.
All right, very good. Thank you all who took the time to call in. That will close public comment on all of our agenda items and general public comment as well. And we will now go back. We'll go back to item number 9, which we have heard the presentation on. And the recommendation is to note and file the CAO reports. So let's go ahead and if they're actually, you know what, I take it back because I think Mr. Blumenfield and Mr. Price both joined us after that presentation began, and I didn't get a chance to ask if you had any questions about it. So if there are no questions, Mr. Price? Mr. Price?
Just for me at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Blumenfield?
I was here during the presentation, so I'm good.
Oh, okay. My mistake. If there are no other questions then or comments, we can go ahead and call the roll on noting and filing this report.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. This item will be noted and filed.
Thank you very much. And before we go to consideration of the consent items, I hope that all of the members of the committee will join me and consent to wishing a very happy birthday to Jacob Wexler, who could think of no better way to celebrate his birthday than to participate in our Budget and Finance Committee meeting today. So, Mr. Wexler, thank you very much for your service to this committee throughout the time you've served on it, and we all wish you a very, very happy birthday.
Second wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Koretz. Unexpected, but thank you very much for that.
All right. So with that, members, I'd like to propose items 8, 11 through 15, 18, and 19 for consent approval. And on item number 8, the recommendation is to approve the Municipal Facilities Committee recommendations. Item 11, the recommendation is to approve the CAO recommendations. Item 12, the recommendation is to concur with the Public Safety Committee recommendation and approve the City Attorney's recommendations. Item 13, the recommendation is to approve the City Attorney's recommendations. Item 14 and 15, the recommendations are to approve the city attorney's recommendations. Item 18, the recommendation is to approve the city attorney's draft ordinance. And then on item 19, the recommendation is to approve the motion. So is there any objection to proceeding with those recommendations? Mr. Koretz.
I'd like to call item 12 and 13 special for brief comments or questions.
12 and 13, okay. Any other items, members? Okay, seeing none, with the exception of items 12 and 13, let's go ahead and vote on the recommendations that I just read for consent items. Please call the roll.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. These items will be approved per your recommendations. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Why don't we go ahead and complete those items that Mr. Koretz called special next. So we'll call item number 12, please.
Item number 12 is the City Attorney Report and Ordinance relative to amending the Los Angeles Administrative Code to update the schedule for charges for emergency services to increase basic life support and advanced life support fees. At its meeting held on August 25th, 2020, the Public Safety Committee approved the recommendations in the City Attorney Report.
Mr. Koretz, do you have comments or questions?
Just a quick question. The amount of the increase for advanced life support from 1,152 to 2,463, increase of almost 70% seems rather high. The basic life support fee also almost 70% also seems rather high. I'm wondering if staff could briefly summarize the reasoning for that increase.
Very good. Do we have someone who can respond to Mr. Koretz's question? Do we have staff on the line who can respond to Mr. Koretz's question about item number 12?
This is Ed Rose with the CIO's office. I have the figures in front of me. However, the fire department did a fee adjustment study, and the last time it was adjusted was in, I believe, 2015. So that's why there was a significant increase from the current level fees.
So that increase is based on a fee study, and it represents full cost recovery?
That's correct.
So could the costs have actually gone up 70% over a 5-year period?
Again, I don't have all the figures in front of me. However, it has been a 5-year period, and they usually goes in coordination with the county's rates. If there's a fire department representative on board here in the audience, then maybe they can kind of chime in as to the details of the cost breakdown.
Is there anyone from the fire department who can respond in greater detail? If not, perhaps we could get that response and further reporting back for Mr. Koretz and the other members of the committee prior to council.
That's fine. We can communicate that to the fire department.
Yeah, I'd like to communicate my concerns primarily because we have groups like Hatsala that also respond in emergencies. Their usual value is that they're closer because there might be a volunteer in every block. So they might get there a minute or two earlier and then turn it over to the fire department. But we have a certain number of cases where people call them and don't call the fire department because they don't want to be charged these exorbitant fees to get treated and then taken to the hospital. So if people are trying to avoid these trips to the hospital now, even though they're often desperately needed with a heart attack, etc., I think we'll only have more people trying to avoid these costs if we increase them by 70%. So I have some concern. I don't know how much this occurs throughout the city. I can only speak to my district, but I think the costs are getting so high that they will intimidate some from making use of emergency services that they really do need.
So, Mr. Kretz, we do have Chief Everett on the line now, and I think he can probably give us further detail about the rate increase for BLS and ALS ambulances. And then also, Chief, if you can speak to the percentage of those fees that are generally compensated by insurance companies or Medi-Cal or Medicare as opposed to individuals, and what we do in cases where somebody can't afford to pay.
Good afternoon, committee members. I apologize for coming on late, Mr. Chair. To answer the first question, as Mr. Rose had mentioned, the fees had not been touched for 5 years, and when the fees the fee structure came over from the county EMS, Department of Health Services, that's when we make our adjustments. But we hadn't seen any raises in the fee structure for that 5-year period. So that represents full cost recovery for our current BLS and ALS transports. In terms of the other question about the payer mix, I actually don't have the breakdown in front of me, but I'm happy to report that back to committee either before next council meeting. We can get that information to you all, and we'll get the proper information. I hate to speculate on it, but in general terms, if we do have a collection service that will attempt to collect for folks that are not able to pay, but I'm not quite sure what that payer mix is.
I'd appreciate that. Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I don't know if we have ways to figure out either how many people we try to collect from that don't really have the financial means, but aren't so broke that a collection agency couldn't squeeze it out of them, even if they're choosing between food and medicine and rent. So I wish we had some way to tell how many people that really can't afford this are being forced to pay anyway, and what the impact is upon them, how many people get charged but don't wind up paying. Because I'm fearful of this will intimidate more people from calling when they really should be calling. And the price was already quite hefty when they were being charged almost $1,500, but being charged almost $2,500 starts to be a big bite to many families' budgets. And I'm just concerned that people won't take advantage of the need to take a transport to a hospital after a heart attack, and we'll just try to bypass that system to avoid the cost.
Well, that's a concern as council member. We definitely want people to call us when they need help. We don't want them to be deterred from calling us when they have an emergency that we need to deal with. My understanding, if I recall correctly, speaking with our folks, we are on the low end, if not the lowest end of that cost. I mean, the increase is significant, obviously, but we are on the lower end, if not the lowest end in the county for those fees. So I'll get you those numbers, and I'll get the rest of the members those numbers as well, and also our payer mix, how's that look?
Yeah, and I also have to add, this would be the worst possible time to make these increases. So I don't know if there's a way to forestall it, a way to allow folks that are in unusually bad financial shape, unemployed, etc. If there's some process, because I really feel like the timing combined with the overwhelmingly high increase just doesn't mesh right now. It just seems like the wrong time to be adding a 70% increase for ambulances when so many people are barely trying to make ends meet, not get evicted, be able to provide everything they need for their families.
And I share that concern as well, Mr. Kretz, very much. Although the answer to that question, I think, also depends largely on what the payer mix in fact is. Because if, hypothetically speaking, and I don't think it's this high, but let's say hypothetically speaking, 90% of the transport fees are paid by insurers, then we should do it as quickly as we can. So this city's budget is supported by insurance companies so that we don't have to cut services that the people of Los Angeles depend upon in order to save money for insurance companies. On the other hand, if it's the flip, it's the reverse of that, and the vast majority of it is paid by individuals, then you're right, this is a very burdensome cost, and I think we need to explore other ways to help alleviate that cost on individuals. For example, a number of years ago, we considered, and I honestly don't remember now whether we even experimented with this. I know some of our adjoining cities have a kind of a voluntary insurance program where residents could pay a modest sum every month or every year, I don't remember what it was, and then in return for that, they would not be charged transport fees if they needed to use an ambulance. We had discussed that probably 8 years ago or so. And Chief, I don't know if you remember whether we ever experimented with a system like that, what the outcome was.
I don't recall specifically, council member, but I do recall that we have looked at several ways to reduce the number of transports that are otherwise not necessary to reduce the bill for folks that really didn't need to go by ambulance to the hospital. We've got several programs that we're working on right now to continue that trend, to reduce the number of transports of people in the back of an ambulance, and perhaps give them an alternative destination or an alternative method of getting to the hospital to seek care. As I recall the payer mix, and again, I'll get you the numbers, the private insurance numbers are definitely on the higher level of what we collect from. Medicare, Medicaid is on the lower end of that tier. But again, I'll get you those numbers. I just don't have them in front of me. I apologize.
Yeah, if we could find some more genteel way to deal with individuals, particularly those that are struggling, I would certainly ask that we take a look at doing so. If we're going to implement a 70% increase, I just would hate to see that implemented upon families that aren't making ends meet as it is.
Yes, sir. Very good. So it sounds like we'll need further information from the department and maybe need to consider some additional recommendations. But members, any other questions or comments on the recommendation that's before us, or any concern about moving forward with this recommendation pending that additional work? No other questions? Okay, Mr. Kretz, any objection to proceeding with the recommendation as it is and then working further on this?
Yes, as long as we do the follow-up on individuals, I'm fine with going ahead with it.
Okay, very good. Then let's go ahead and call the roll on approval of the recommendation on this matter.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. This matter is approved to concur with the Public Safety Committee and approve the City Attorney's recommendations.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and call item number 13 now.
Item number 13 is a city attorney report relative to approving Joshua P. Friedman, an outside council to continue providing collection services.
Mr. Kretz.
Yes, just a real quick question on this. Why we are certain that it's more cost effective to do it this way than by using our own city attorney's office.
Council members, Ann Haley, City Attorney's Office. I manage outside counsel for the office. And Councilmember Koretz, we have utilized outside counsel for this purpose previously and always on a contingent basis. So the easiest answer to your question is that there is no cost effectively to having an outside firm, and this is a one-man shop, do this work for us, and he is only compensated when collections are actually made, and that payment comes out of monies that he is able to collect for us, and he's been pretty successful at that. So the bottom line is it frees up our in-house lawyers to continue to do the work they have to do for the office, and while we have this outside assistance with no general fund impact.
So our experience has been positive enough, because obviously if this person was ineffective, it would not be a good process. Obviously, if they are, then whatever percentages they don't collect, we don't pay for, so that would be fine.
That's correct. And we did a competitive bid for this work some years back, and actually, surprisingly to me, there were not even that many, we didn't get very many responses. I guess there are not too many people who do this kind of work, and again, it has proven to be absolutely only revenue producing and with no cost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Members, any other questions on this matter? All right. Seeing none, let's go ahead and call the roll on the recommendation.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price. Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin. 3 ayes, this matter passes.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's next take up item number 7, please.
Item number 7 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to revising the debt management policy section of the financial policies for the City of Los Angeles, and requesting the City Attorney, with the assistance of the CAO, to prepare any necessary ordinances required to codify the revision.
Right, and I believe there's an amended recommendation on this matter.
Yes, sir, that is correct. There is an amended recommendation. It's recommendation 2 in the CEO's report, and the new language should read as follows. Request that the City Attorney, with the assistance of the City Administrative Officer, to amend and restate certain provisions of the ordinance related to the revised debt management policy of the financial policies of the city. And we have shared a copy of that with the clerk so that it can read correctly into the record.
Okay. Very good. Any further report on this matter before we go to questions? Okay. Any questions, members, on this matter? Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. Why are we not planning on using interest rate swaps in the future? I'm assuming with rates as low as they are now, it's possible that such swaps could be advantageous, although I'm not an expert in this area.
Natalie Brill, CIO's office. We decided to take it out of the policy because the council really didn't like them as much. They weren't as successful as we thought they were going to be. It's basically a play on the market that you're assuming that rates are always going to be, the swap will be lower than interest rates, and we're just not seeing that. We're seeing the municipal market heading in very low direction, so we took it out of the policy. It's not something I think that we would consider. There are provisions in the policy for us to come back to if we decide to do them again, but I think we took them out of the policy so they weren't something that would conventionally be used.
So do I misunderstand how this works? And that the fact that interest rates are at pretty close to record lows, if not record lows, would be advantageous for us in terms of using interest rate swaps.
Interest rate swaps are usually lower than regular interest rates. That's the reason you do them. They are a variable rate instrument that is used, and then you fix it out. And it's very difficult to get out of them because on the other end, with the broker that you're dealing with, they in turn invest their money somewhere and they don't want to get out of those investments. So it makes it very difficult to get out of them, and it becomes costly to get out of them. So we decided that it really was not something that the city should be doing, that we do very well in the market on fixed rate debt, so there's no reason to do an interest rate swap.
Yeah, I remember we lost money doing
Yes.
this in the past. I'm just wondering whether just the fact that we're at such low interest rates, whether that helps make them more viable or isn't relevant to it.
It makes them less viable, actually, because that means that other rates are lower. The market has been very fickle over the last 5, 6, 7 years. We'll continue to see how fickle it is going into the future. We just did a fixed rate deal, and the 10-year rate was, 1.7%. So there's no reason to do an interest rate swap when fixed rate debt is so low. And then on the variable rate, because we do variable rate debt, and that right now is below 1%. So the interest rate swap assumes that your fixed rate debt is going to be higher, much higher. Although the last swaps that we did, we did save as much money as we thought. We did save some money. We did not save what we initially had estimated.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this matter, members? All right. The recommendation was to approve the CAO's recommendations as amended. And do we need to read anything further in the record, or Mr. Wexler's summary sufficed?
Yes, it was sufficient.
Okay, then let's go ahead and call the roll, please.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin. 4 ayes, this item is approved as amended.
Very good. Thank you very much. That will take us next to item number 10.
Item number 10 is a CAO report and motion Gregorio Buscaino relative to mid-quarter reports to the Budget and Finance Committee on the status of the city's finances, including updates on revenues, expenditures, the pace at which employees are subscribing to the separation incentive program or the savings generated if it is implemented, and any other pertinent details that substantially impact the city's finances.
So, members, as you will recall, back in June, we made the determination that it was going to be virtually impossible to be able to have really clear and reliable predictions of revenues in the same way that we normally do in a typical budget year, and that it would be important to have frequent updates throughout the fiscal year just to kind of determine where we stand so that we can make so that we can plan the difficult choices that we are likely to have before us and have some clearer picture of how severe those difficult choices may need to be. And so we'll be having this kind of report more frequently than the typical FSRs that we do in a normal year. And this will be the first of those to hear the news about where we stand on revenues and the other related issues. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Llewellyn. Mr. Llewellyn, thank you very much for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. I appreciate the opportunity to address your committee. My report will be short and rather sobering. As we know, we're only 2 months into the fiscal year. We're already 87 million below budget in our general fund. And as this committee knows better than anyone else in the city, the budget was already lean to start, cutting spending by almost 200 million from normal growth. And our budget assumed a slow ramp up to the economy, such that our budget plan for July and August were tepid at best. We are 87 million below our July and August plan. We aren't making a final projection of revenue losses for the year at this point, but we think it likely to be in the $200 to $400 million range. And again, not to kind of just beat the point, but those losses are on top of the already austere budget. There are CAO revenue experts here to address specific questions you have about revenue, but I would note we have little good news. Most of our revenue sources are at risk in the best case scenario. And your committee knows we often look to special funds to help us manage through shortfalls in our general funds. That may not be an option this year. Many of our special revenue fund sources are also challenged, particularly our transportation funds, which are sales tax or gas tax based, and our departments like Rec and Parks and the Zoo, which earn substantial revenues from participation and admission fees. Finally, Mr. Kretz, in light of your discussion about fee increases, our office, like your entire council, is very concerned about any fee increase on our residents this year. And yet the budget is premised on full cost recovery of fees in most areas. Any decision to go away from full cost recovery creates even a bigger hole. While our major concerns are on the revenue side, we're not free from concern, unfortunately, on the expenditure side. Our budget currently is premised on a hard hiring freeze and furloughs for most civilian employees. Savings from the separation plan, which are not as great as we had hoped, still are premised on a hard freeze. COVID, we have estimates through the end of the year, but who knows there on our expenditures. The Alliance homeless litigation, the expenditures there could be greater than planned. And our litigation expenditures generally we're nervous about. And finally, with the fires raging, it just reminds us it would be very difficult to deal with in another emergency this year. We appreciate the committee's leadership over the past decade in building up our reserves. Our healthy reserve fund was critical to closing the 1920 year. The economy collapsed in the fourth quarter with no warning due to COVID. We could not have planned for it, and our reserve fund honestly got us through that. Still, as your committee knows, particularly with the 1920 hit, our reserves are in a very reduced state. We simply can't expect the reserve fund to be the answer to the shortfalls this year. So against this kind of gloomy backdrop, we're beginning to work with your general managers and the mayor's office to develop cost-saving measures for presentation to you in our next financial status report. None of the reductions under consideration will be easy or painless. We intend to work with the mayor, the CLA, and particularly your committee to develop the best options for council's consideration. And with that, I and my smarter staff are here to answer your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. And I just, because sometimes these things slip by quickly, I just want to reiterate your initial point. $87 million short in revenues, and we're not even finished in the first quarter yet of the fiscal year. And the furloughs that we just voted to approve will save exactly $0 because they've already been budgeted for. So when we take these dramatic large steps, like a furlough that will, be very impactful on services and our employees and our constituents, we have saved $0 by doing that. All we have done is met the expectations, the assumptions of the budget as it stands now. So those furloughs don't save the first dollar of that $87 million in shortfall. Is that right, Mr. Llewellyn?
That is right, Mr. Chair.
The hiring freeze, even if we were real about it, and even if we agreed, no, a hiring freeze means a hiring freeze, even if we agreed to that, that would save exactly zero of those $87 million. Is that right as well?
That is right, Mr. Chair.
So any exception to those things is an expenditure. Anytime we agree to forego a fee or hire some people that we really need, or to cut back on one of those assumptions in the budget, is an expenditure of money out of this budget that we have no revenues to meet. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Members, questions? Mr. Koretz.
Yeah, I just have one. The mayor's actions to look at a variety of things all seem in order, except for one. I'm wondering whether the mayor has the ability to initiate anything relating to layoffs, or if that is not just a purely council driven policy decision.
Mr. Koretz, I believe what the mayor's budget cutting memo calls for is asking personnel to set that up if you have to go there. As you know, the first stage in that is looking at people's employee records, bringing them up to date, how many years they have in which classification. There's a lot of, unfortunately, preparatory work to making that hard policy decision. I don't think the mayor probably has the opinion, although I'm not the lawyer anymore, has the ability to actually order layoffs without your EERC and council, but I don't believe his memo calls for that. It calls for getting ready in case you have to go that far.
Yeah, it strikes me as a bad idea to do a lot of setup for something that, as a policy matter, I don't think we're ready to give any indication that we're moving forward in this direction. And I do think if we're thinking about it, we probably need to rethink what we're doing with targeted local hire, because the only thing worse than not hiring hundreds of new employees that are certainly the most appropriate to hire, and we'd be doing some good equity things, is to hire them and just to fire them. I mean, essentially, if we're going to do layoffs, the first people we have to lay off are the last hired. So the last thing you want to do is set someone on the right path that hasn't worked for 2 years because they came out of jail and can't get hired. And then you hire them, and 3 months later, you lay them off. So I think we have to look at that. We have to look at the fact that a number of our other more recent hires were targeted local hire. It just seems like even worse than what I fought hard against 10 years ago or so, where we were looking at layoffs. But now a number of our more recent employees, and if we move forward with this project, our most recent employees would be the last people you'd want to then be laying off. But that's the process. It's by seniority largely. So I wouldn't even want to hint about this unless we were awfully sure we were going to do it. If we're awfully sure we're going to do it, we really should be holding off on hiring all the people that I pushed hard for us to hire this year in targeted local hire. It's one of the best equity things we could possibly do, but it's one of the worst if we're going to turn around and lay them off.
Councilmember, if you're asking me to respond to that, I agree you should stop hiring.
Members? Mr. Bonnet.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I guess nobody, well, some people will, but you can't really be surprised that we're where we are. We've been talking about this for a while, and We heard, I think it was from Claire Bartels early on in this process, the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and we're effectively at the worst case scenario, and it's potential that the worst case scenario might actually not be the worst case scenario. So really some ugly stuff. I'm fine with what we're doing today, asking the process to start, because I think it's always important to do that so that we can actually weigh the choices effectively and know what the consequences are. When the CAO did the analysis, last May of the furloughs, it gave us a real sense of what would be at risk and what wouldn't. I got to say the one thing that that really troubles me. You all heard me talk about how I can't abide cuts in the emergency management department in the middle of where we are. The idea of potentially laying off a firefighter when the whole damn state is on fire, when you can't see the sun, when we've got, I think, 10 of the top 20 fires we've ever had in California, it's just not something I can abide. So whatever we do, for me, we have to find a way. We can't lay off firefighters because the need for them is just getting greater. So that's a point I'll revisit as we go through the process. But I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Mr. Blumenfield. You're still muted, Bob.
Great, thank you. And I agree we need to move forward to figure this out. I did have some questions about both the revenues and the expenditures. When in Council, Mr. Lowe, when we were talking about the furloughs, you had mentioned that we were currently under discussion with all of our labor partners dealing with the raises and whether there would be deferment of some of the additional costs. Where are we in that process? Is there, and I know it is a legal process that has to happen. Is there a time frame when that will either produce results or not produce results? And how do we factor that into this budget? Because and what is the order of magnitude that we're talking about? I'm not sure, but I believe that there's probably over $100 million worth of raises out there that were guaranteed by contracts, et cetera, and I'm talking across the board, that may or may not be able to be deferred. I don't know. Could you help enlighten us as to whether or not that's a realistic element to all this, or where we are in that process?
Thank you, Council Member. We have started our conversations with all of our labor partners. I would not want to predict how they will end. Our labor partners did work with us the last time, both sworn and civilian. We are talking to both sides, but I would not want to predict how that will end at this point. As a general matter, for them to give back something in their existing contract, it has to be an agreed upon resolution, unlike a new contract where, if worse comes to worse, we can go to impasse and impose. So this would ultimately have to be sort of a package of agreements. And everyone understands the calendar. So there's obviously pressure to do it now. So I hear that.
Okay, and in terms of the order of magnitude, what's the range of money that could possibly come out of there from zero to, what, 100 million?
I'd rather not sort of predict that at this point, sir.
I didn't mean a prediction. I just meant just to get a sense of scale in terms of what's even, what the range is. Maybe you're viewing that as prediction. I was assuming that was a factual question.
Sir, I'm happy to send to you, sir. I have a report, but I have to confess I haven't added it up in front of me. I was looking at it, of our various labor partners in there already agreed upon contractual increases. So in the short term, again, we're looking at it would have to be money this year to solve this year's problem.
Right.
And many of our partners are getting raises later this year, in this fiscal year.
Okay.
And just to add one, I'm sorry, Mr. Blumenfield, I thought you were done.
I have some other questions, but go follow up. Feel free.
Yeah, on that point, just keep in mind that we went through a similar process during the Great Recession. And we went in partnership with the labor representatives to try to find cost reductions. And they weren't all just eliminating a raise or deferring a raise. There were a whole menu of different ways, and labor itself developed many of those suggestions of how we can have cost savings. I think a lot of people are focusing kind of just on the idea of the contractual increases, but there are other things in addition to that. In addition or in lieu of that might also be potential cost savings. The one thing I would just want to highlight for purposes of the public who's asking us, well, why don't you just do that? We have done it in the past. We did it in the Great Recession, worked with labor to do that, and we have been undergoing that process already with our labor unions throughout this entire budget challenge that we face. But it takes a lot of time when you're in negotiations. If you'll remember back to the Great Recession, there were considerable things that labor did, but they didn't do it in 2008, right after the stock market crashed. In fact, it wasn't even in the first couple of fiscal years after that. It took some time to reach those sorts of long-term cost-saving agreements. And our challenge right now is the next 8 months. It's getting through this fiscal year with the minimal, with the lowest, with the least damage that we can do. And so we need to do that for sure, but people need to understand it takes time to get results out of negotiation. So, sorry, Mr. Blumenfield,
No, that's exactly
right.
Interject. I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, there's an urgency to it, of course, because we're trying to avoid layoffs and we're trying to avoid, additional furloughs. And as you know, the burden often of these layoffs comes on the junior members of our workforce who are starting their careers and their families. And we lose that generational, it's a brain drain from our city employees. So we need to make tough decisions. And unfortunately, time is not on our side. So I know that everybody here knows that, but that was the purpose of asking those questions, is to try to get at what we're looking at. And you mentioned labor has been a great partner, and they do come up with a lot of creative things. The whole SIP program really was the product of labor, and I guess that'll transition to the next question. I know we have we're only 6 days into the 15-day sign-up period, but have we had a lot of folks rescind the SIP, and do we feel like we're moving in a good direction there? Is it going to potentially save more money now that we're opening it, or any thoughts on the SIP?
Thank you, Councilmember. Two things. One, we had a handful of additional rescissions from the first group, and we've had a couple of new signups already. Our guess is we're going to end up somewhere in the same number, that 1280 range, but it's still early in the kind of sign-up period, the reopen door. One other thing I would like to sort of say about sort of our managers, our electeds, and our labor partners. I think we were all hoping that there would be another stimulus bill out of Washington this fall. Even a month ago, it looked much more likely. I do think all of us, in some ways, and I include our labor partners in that, we're totally unwilling to face the hard music until that either happened or didn't. By all accounts, it looks like it is not going to happen now. If it happens, it's going to be with a new team in Washington and after they're empowered, which means February, March at the earliest. So it's very difficult to wait for the Washington bailout that I think we deserve. By the way, I think it would be good for the economy. So it's not just taking care of your friends. But I do think people were waiting to see how Washington would shake out to make some of the hard decisions. And I think it's shaken out the wrong way. So we have no more rabbits in the hat.
It's a nice depressing thought. Okay.
Sorry.
I know. I get it.
That's what the budget committee is all about these days, Mr. Blumenfield.
Question on the Metro contract with PD. What does it mean? You know, they are. There's a revenue reduction, as I understand it. So some of the overtime in the Metro is going to be cut back, and there's a guaranteed amount that PD gets. So does less Metro subsidized overtime mean that we have to make up that difference somehow? How does that affect our budget?
So, sir, the budget did assume more Metro, the very initial draft of it assumed more Metro overtime. In your budget revisions in July, you reduced that number to a more realistic number, and we do not have to make that up with general fund or other kinds of overtime. We are within our contractual amounts, although certainly our employees who are used to getting overtime are disappointed if they don't get it. But we are not obligated to replace it in any way.
Okay. And then the economic crisis is killing us on all the revenue fronts. Property value seems to be holding, but has there been some analysis as to what extent when we're going to know whether it's going to cause a reduction in the property values and how that would impact us, and whether our rent moratorium is going to help with that?
So, sir, Melissa Krantz is listening, our revenue expert. The short answer is, most of our property money comes in the second half of the year. So we always are sort of hard predicting on that. But we originally sort of had property in green. It looked like sort of basic value was going to stay stable, even if transactions were down so much, which affects documentary transfer tax. We're now we moved all property into yellow. We are concerned about it.
Right. Okay. And then, parking fines. I know that number, about 18.5 million short on that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I guess every time that we extend the restrictions, that eats into that further as well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we just need to figure out how to link up all of our policy decisions so that we're all rowing in the same direction. But I always feel that parking should not be it shouldn't be looked at as a revenue model. It should be, parking is about mobility more than revenue. But we do need to look at it because that's a large amount. That's the budget of a lot of our smaller departments. But anyway, I've got a lot of questions on the budget stuff, but I think in terms of this item, we need to move forward, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to support the notion made by my colleagues. We want to be sensitive to the last hired, first fired syndrome, especially as it impacts those who are just coming into the workforce, and other young professionals coming in. I think it really be a blow that we want to try to avoid if possible. So anything we can do to avoid that, I certainly would like to hear about more. And I didn't see it in here though. Are we projecting that the cannabis revenues are going to be higher, lower, about the same, or do we see any impact there at all? Cannabis income.
Mr. Kretz, that's one Ms. Krantz had sort of a specific on that line item, what she's thinking at this
Yeah. This is Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. Based on the revenue data that we're getting right now from LA Tax, cannabis receipts are coming in higher. But of course, that's still part of the larger business tax sum, and this is all still supporting the general fund. So, what we don't know is this happens with annual renewals, what we see those in the start of January, and where those will end at the end of it. So even if cannabis receipts come in higher, we really just don't know where the rest of the business tax will land.
And are we doing anything special to facilitate those payments in any way?
That would be a question for Office of Finance.
But again, sir, so far, cannabis is doing well. It's one of our few, it's only one line in the business tax, but it's one line that's doing well.
Yeah.
It's one of our few lines that's doing well in the entire spreadsheet, but that one's doing okay, sir.
Good, good. And then finally, and I may have missed this, so where are we now with our employee incentive retirement program? Is it the same one we had before? We just extended the date, or have we changed some terms along with those, with the extension? Kind of where are we now, and how long will that last?
So, sir, it's the same plan that has been before you, but your council voted to sort of reopen it one last time for potential new members from that group. That just started last week, so we don't have. It's going to close in only another week, so we will know by next week. Okay. But the initial group of about 1277 that signed up, we did have a few people that pulled out, but not very many. We're expecting a few to add, so we're thinking it will end up being similar place.
Okay, another week, you say, another week?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Kretz, did you want to be heard again?
I did want to mention with marijuana, I think we're doing well, but we could do better because we remain with dozens, if not hundreds, of illegal businesses still, and we seem not to be willing to focus on enforcement. And I would remind everybody that every dollar of enforcement is going to bring in considerably more than that by the customers going to our existing businesses and increasing revenues, as well as the health dangers of the illegal places and some of the problems that we're seeing, especially in vaping, the untested items. So once again, that's an opportunity for us both to save money and protect the lives of our residents. So that's one really obvious choice. Also, I just want to ask, are we being asked in some way to validate the mayor's list, or are we just hearing this item and not making any policy out of it?
Mr. Kretz, we intend to work with departments on coming up with, honestly, cut scenarios for your consideration. And your council will ultimately have to approve them through the FSR process, whether it's tightening contracts, whether it's whatever the higher vacancy rate, you will be deciding that.
So we're not being asked to approve this list currently, because if we were, I would ask that the items starting the process for laying people off be excluded from that. If we're not formally doing that, I would certainly voice my objections to personnel starting to spend time and money and effort on an action that we certainly wouldn't want to take until we've dealt with how we're doing our targeted local hire with that in mind.
So, Mr. Kretz, I'm sensitive to those concerns too. And no one, I think, would be prepared to initiate a layoff process at this point. The recommendation, the CAO's recommendation right now is to have the City Council instruct the CAO to coordinate the development of spending reduction proposals in all city departments, as included in the mayor's memo. And in upcoming financial status reports to present those proposals and other concrete actions required to reduce city expenditures to address the revenue shortfall. So we're simply asking the CAO to go back, work up those recommendations, and then bring them back to this committee. But I will say that in terms of layoffs, obviously none of us even wants to have that conversation. None of us wants to talk about it. But it is a long process. And if we don't begin to prepare the lifeboats now, by the time we hit the iceberg, it's too late. So that's why it is, I somewhat disagree with your premise about preparing to do things that we're not prepared. We have to prepare now to do things that we really do not want to do, because it'll be too late if we wait until afterwards.
Well, Mr. Chair, I do think we're going to have to, at some point soon, make a decision one way or the other. We've allocated money to engage in equity hiring by using our targeted local hire, which is the most equity-focused hiring one could possibly do, and yet we're talking about preparing to hire them and then fire them, which could not be more counterproductive. So at some point soon, if we're really even going to consider layoffs, we need to consider whether we're moving forward with this program or not.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, Mr. Llewellyn, as I've heard from my colleagues, we are going to advance these recommendations and ask you to go and begin preparing those policy recommendations to bring back, or budgetary recommendations to bring back. As you do that work, I would like to ask that you give special consideration to what might our options be with regard to targeted local hire if a layoff scenario becomes necessary. Is there any way under civil service law or under our collective bargaining agreements or in any other way that we can treat targeted local hire differently than other employees? Those are the sorts of considerations I think we would like to take into account before we make those final decisions.
We're happy to report back on that, sir. And Mr. Chair and Mr. Koretz, certainly the mayor has instructed general managers. Again, there may not be as many options as before. Are there ways to move general fund to special fund to save jobs? Are there ways we can contract services in to save jobs? You know, I don't know that we're going to have unlimited choices like that without harder choices, but certainly that is part of our instruction from the mayor, and I expect from your council to us to look at ways to save jobs first.
Okay, anything else, members, on this matter? So the recommendation is to approve the CAO's recommendation, as I just indicated, and to instruct the CAO to report again at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting scheduled for October 26th. Is there any other concerns, questions, comments? Seeing none, let's go ahead and Mr. Krebs.
I just wanted to ask that our concerns that we expressed be forwarded as part of this to come back when we report in October.
Yes, if there's no objection, it shall be so. All right, let's go ahead and call the roll on those recommendations, please.
And would the committee like to approve the motion that is also pending before it?
Yes. Actually, I think the motion has already been approved, so this action is pursuant to the motion, unless I'm mistaken about that. But approve the motion if it hasn't already been done, yes.
Thank you. Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes, this item is approved as amended.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. That takes us next to item number 16.
Item number 16 is a motion, Koretz Blumenfield, relative to requesting the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to amend section 5.199 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to add language preventing any expenditures from the Animal Sterilization Trust Fund from being used for staff salaries and benefits.
Okay, and do we have a presentation on this?
Hi, this is Susie Rios-Bellinot with the Office of the CAO. We haven't prepared a presentation, but both myself and Animal Services staff are available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Mr. Koretz, did you want to comment on this one or have any questions?
I do want to comment. In the past, the trust fund is, which is a mix of city dollars and donations from the public, has not always been used exclusively for spay and neuter, as it was originally intended, for spay and neuter surgeries and directly related expenses. And particularly the public donors that have given money for just this purpose don't always appreciate the fact that it may be expended for purposes beyond this in animal services. There's some chance that less money may be allocated to the general fund for the trust fund by this action. If that happens, we'll have to deal with it the best we can and ask the department to work harder on fundraising for the trust fund. But at least it'll mean that the trust fund is used exclusively for support of spay and neuter, which is certainly the most important thing we can do to reduce pet overpopulation. The question is, I presume that we will pay veterinarians and vet techs, but presumably for only the percentage of time that they spend actually involved with spay and neuter surgeries. So I would ask if we're able to do that and what percentage of a typical department vet's time is devoted to spay and neuter.
Hi, Catherine Chico with the Department of Animal Services. The department currently, the only time our in-house veterinary staff performs the spay and neuter surgeries is in conjunction with other type of surgeries that they're performing. Right now, all of our spay and neuter surgeries associated with our voucher programs and other types of adoption actions, those are actually performed by our contracted on-site clinics, our mobile vans, and our letter of agreement contractors.
And so the ones that are done by our folks, even when it's a percentage of their surgical time, are we able to call that out, or would we simply not pay our veterinarians in-house at all for spay and neuter?
We could actually segregate, by averaging out the amount of time. It would be somewhat difficult since they are performing those types of surgeries in conjunction with performing other type of surgeries that the animal might, need. They're not just doing standalone spay and neuter surgeries at this time.
And if I may jump in there, again, this is Susie Rios-Bellinot with the CAO's office. At this point in time, the fund actually pays the salaries of less than 3 full-time equivalent employees, and none of those are vets or veterinary technicians. It's actually people more on the admin side who are directly related to administering the fund and providing those reimbursements to the veterinary partners that we have. So it's accounting clerks, admin clerks, and again, it's less than 3 full-time equivalent employees.
So the funds coming out of this fund would be used for the admin services, perhaps some minimal veterinary services, and the rest is for vouchers that go to outside folks that do the bulk of the surgeries.
That is correct.
Okay, and no other expenditures from this fund would be permitted, presumably, under the provision.
That is correct. It's only, the fund is only eligible per the admin code to pay salaries and benefits that relate directly to the provision of spay and neuter services.
As it should be. Thank you.
So, Mr. Kretz, you touched on my question, really, which was, you know, I know we don't do much of it now, but maybe at some point in the future, if we wanted to insource this work, if you know, we wanted to do more spay and neutering by city employees, would anything in what's before us today interfere with our ability to do that? In other words,
I would say yes, it could. If we determine that, or council determines that funds from this fund are no longer eligible to pay any salaries or benefits, then we would not be able to pay city employees to perform spay and neuter surgeries from this fund.
It sounded like that was not Mr. Kretz's intention to exclude, right? Or am I wrong, Mr. Kretz? Because if
no, you're absolutely right, and my understanding is that that would be 100% permitted under this. It's just that if a vet was spending half of their time doing spay and neuter surgeries and half the time doing other surgeries, they would only 50% of that would apply and come out of this fund. But in no way should it make it more difficult for our vets to do surgeries and have this trust fund pay for it.
So can our recommendation be then that the ordinance should so provide that the allowable uses of the sterilization fund, I think, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it in front of me right now, should be limited to expenses directly related to animal sterilization, which could include salaries directly related to animal sterilization. That I didn't articulate that well, but I think that's, I gather that that's the intention, and I would be comfortable with that. I just wouldn't want to have us do something where we were forced to rely on a voucher system and we were prohibited by an ordinance from bringing work in-house.
In no way am I looking for that. I'm just looking for us not to pay for unrelated things to spay and neuter, which I certainly have heard have happened, but whether or not that does happen, this would more clearly call out that that is not permitted.
Okay. Okay, so can we ensure then that the recommendation to the city attorney captures that intent that we just described?
If I may, again, this is Susie. I don't know if there's a representative from the city attorney's office that can speak to this, but my understanding is that the admin code as it stands currently already stipulates that only salaries and benefits directly related to spay and neuter can be paid out of this fund. So that already is the case, and you would not need an amendment to make it so.
This is Catherine Chico with the Department of Animal Services, and when the first motion had gone through, when we obtained clarification on what it could and could not be reimbursed, the department was told that the admin costs would still be drawn from that. Reimbursement of the admin cost and the related benefit costs would be pulled from the animal sterilization. And then that was the reason why the second motion came through, to cease all related costs and reimbursement for salaries from being taken from the animal sterilization fund. So that was our understanding, because when the first motion had gone through, we were under the understanding that it was going to cease all salary reimbursement and related cost reimbursement from the fund. but we were told no. The way that it was originally written, that did not exclude those expenses from being, pulled from the fund. So the second motion was actually done with the intent, and this was my understanding, and correct me if I'm not right on this one, that the second motion was actually just to stop all salary reimbursement costs and related cost reimbursements from coming out of the fund.
I mean, honestly, the purpose of the motion was to make costs not directly related to spay and neuter, which many have articulated was happening, to cease, and for reimbursement or payment of salaries to be directly only for spay and neuter, and only for a percentage of an employee's time that was involved in spay and neuter. So again, if you have an administrative person that's spending half their time on spay and neuter and half of their other time, we would not want their full salary to be taken from this fund. We'd want only the portion relating to spay and neuter. And if it was already in the record and it's not working, this is at least intended to provide greater emphasis and clarity if it's needed, because it would appear that it is.
Catherine Chico with the Department of Animal Services. Yes, that's exactly what's happening at this time. The admin staff, the accountant, and the admin clerks, they are just charging their actual work hours that they are working on processing the payments and, for reimbursement and invoice processing to the fund. So they're not just charging all of their time, just the portion that they're working on animal sterilization funds, tasks. So that is currently happening.
I mean, I somewhat question this. I even have gotten feedback that the fund might get less city money if we do this, because other purposes that have been taken out of this fund to fund more general animal services would be halted. And so the result might be in the next budget, we might get less money from the fund. I don't know if that's right or wrong, or whether one publicly wants to admit that this may be the case, but I want some way to nail down the fact that not a penny is being spent out of this fund that isn't for spay and neuter. That's all this is about.
Mr. Kretz, would it make sense because I think we're clear on the intention, and the department is saying, oh yeah, well, that's what we're already acting consistent with the intention. I wonder if it would make sense to get a report back from the city attorney about whether or not, in fact, the current law does restrict, or how the law does restrict expenditures from the trust fund. And then I wonder if maybe, I hate to spitball this stuff and think out loud, but I assume this is audited from time to time to determine whether the expenditures are appropriate out of the fund. But maybe that would be a way to ensure that unrelated salary expenses or other things are not being inappropriately applied.
I mean, we could always ask for an audit of the last 3 years of the fund, but if it proves that it was not being handled correctly, what do we do? What we're looking to do is nail down the fact that this is only done in the prescribed way. So I don't know if it actually takes an additional motion or what it takes, but we need to find some solid way to prevent this practice from occurring or continuing.
So I agree with you, and I guess the challenge is that we have a proposal to amend an ordinance, but the department is saying that we already assume that that's what the ordinance says, and that's how we're acting. So it's not the ordinance; there's a disconnect someplace else, or a potential disconnect, and I don't know where to go with that now. Ms. Chico, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I think the disconnect was when the first ordinance went through, identifying that the funds could only be used for, the related salaries. And then the second one went through and it removed that language. I believe that the impression was that the second motion did not want any reimbursement made to the general fund for the salaries nor the related costs. But from what I'm hearing today, that wasn't the intent of the second motion that is here today. And it was just to make sure that the actual hours and reimbursements were based on the actual hours. And I, as the supervisor over the staff that is performing those duties, I'm here today to say that yes, the staff is actually charging only the time that they are performing those duties, and because I see the timesheets and I'm signing off, and I've been with the department for 2 years now, so we are just ensuring that only the time that those staff members are working on those are actually identified on in their D time.
And for the record, they're not using this to cover travel expenses that the department needs or lodging or anything like that. It's literally just for what it's supposed to be for.
We cannot pay any lodging, travel, or any other time out of these funds. It's strictly for the vouchers, for the surgeries, and then of course when we have to pay back the related costs and the salaries. That's the only payments that are coming out of this fund.
And to underline, this is Susie Rios spelling out again, to underline what Catherine's saying, in fact, we annually budget a certain amount for those salaries that are directly tied to the administration of the fund. And it's not until the end of the year that it gets calculated out exactly how much was actually charged. And oftentimes it's lower than what we've budgeted. So the fund really only reimburses exactly what we can track back to D time and work orders that directly relate to spay and neuter.
So I don't know what to suggest, Mr. Kretz, but if you would like to, think about whether there's an approach to verify the information that, whether through the city attorney or through an audit or some other way, we can hold this. We can. I'm not sure what to recommend because it sounds like we've already achieved at least what the stated objective is that I share, but I'm not sure how to proceed on the request for the ordinance change if the ordinance in fact already does what we want it to do. Maybe the practice hews to that, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We're being told today that it does already, but if you've got information from other places that there have been exceptions or there are concerns about being exceptions, then maybe there's some other step that we need to take to get to the bottom of that.
Mr. Chair, I suspect we're not going to be able to spitball that today. So why don't I ask that if Mr. Blumenfield doesn't object, that we just hold it in committee and give ourselves some time to look at this more closely.
Mr. Blumenfield, you good? Okay,
thank you.
I assume there's no objection to doing that, so we will go ahead and hold this in committee for now and reconsider at a future date. All right. Thank you. That brings us to item number 17.
Item number 17 is an Office of Finance and Information Technology Agency joint report relative to requesting the approval to transfer savings from Information Technology Agency's salaries general account to partially fund the contractual services for the LA tax system for fiscal year 2020-21.
Good afternoon, council members. Diana Mangiolu, Interim Director of Finance and City Treasurer.
Good afternoon.
Before you is a proposal to transfer funds from ITA's salaries budget to Finance's contractual services account. This is a joint report that we've developed. The $460,000 that we're proposing to transfer, coupled with the $255,000 that currently exists within our budget, would cover all costs for this existing fiscal year. We are recommending to contract out these services. Whereas ITA was the LA tax, provided LA tax maintenance services for us, but as a result of anticipated significant changes in staff, and also significant changes that we've made with LA tax, we've both come to an agreement that it's best if we contract out these services. LA Tax, as you may know, it's our system that tracks all tax and permit operations and manages more than $2.5 billion annually. The contractor that we would be entering into an agreement with would be Infosys, as we would be piggybacking off of an agreement with the state of California. The proposal before you is would have a net neutral impact for the current fiscal year. As this is something that would typically be considered and addressed as part of the annual budget process, it's something that we felt we couldn't wait, that given the changes are happening within the interim year, that we need to have a plan to shift over services to a contractor so that we don't take any risks with maintaining our system. I should have started with joining me is our AGM, Carl Sampson, with the Office of Finance, but we also have ITA present as well, and we're available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, any questions or concerns about this item? Okay. Excellent presentation, Ms. Mangiolo. You have no questions or concerns, so I think we can go ahead and vote on the recommendation. And the recommendation is to approve the finance and ITA recommendation to transfer $460,000 from the ITA salary account for contractual services.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin. 4 ayes, this recommendation is approved.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, council members.
All right. And if my note taking is correct, that completes our open session items. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
For the record, on item number 6, Council File 19-0342-S1, the matter has also been referred to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee.
Great. Okay, we can now go ahead and proceed into closed session for consideration of our closed session items, 1 through 6.
Thank you. One moment.
Mr. Chair, is there a way to get a break for a couple minutes?
Sure, go right ahead. We're good.
Okay, back in open session.
All right, the Budget and Finance Committee is back now in open session. We have concluded our consideration of items 1 through 6 in closed session, and there being no other business before the committee other than to again extend our happy birthday wishes to Mr. Wexler. This committee is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.